there is no data showing job loss with AI yet, right? And a lot of people are attributing rifts that are taking place to AI. When in reality, they're not really due to AI. But like what it does is it leads to preemptive action. So the states hear that, then the states grab those sound bites, and the state politicians start using that as a platform on which they build regulatory controls. And it's all a pseudo reality, right? Like everyone's just sitting over here and look at this. If this happens, we're all screwed. But none of that's happened. They're all forecasting where we might be in 5 years. And what that's doing is giving a lot of ammunition to politicians who can then pass regulation or get support to pass regulation on the basis of that. And that doesn't help anyone, especially a small lab,
Yes, I think the regulation is not bad per se, but this fragmentation that is happening either between the states or countries, it's really just adding to the drag.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Code and Connor podcast. My name is Connor Deeks, CEO of CodeStrap, and I'm joined, as always, with the original CodeStrap himself and CTO, Dorian Smiley. We're going to be bringing you guys the latest and greatest around AI platforms, the tech, the companies, and the communities that surround them. The focus of today's episode is Davos and the global order around AI. We're joined today by Michal Rachtan. Michal is the co-founder and CTO at Unit8, a Swiss-based data and AI services company that partners with large enterprises on important missions. Today, Unit8 is 160 plus people strong, operating across industries like financial services, life sciences, and manufacturing in Europe and North America. They advise and guide customers and then implement production-grade data platforms and agentic solutions with a focus on outcomes and governance. They are a part of a strong ecosystem of strategic partners as well, including Palantir Technologies, OpenAI, NVIDIA, Databricks, and Snowflake. Before Unit8, Michal was a tech lead and forward-deployed engineer at Palantir, helping customers deploy the platform at scale. Michal, welcome to Code and Connor.
Thank you, guys. Happy to be here.
Welcome. Great to have you, man.
Let's jump right into Davos, the event. Michal, you were there, boots on the ground, so to speak. What was it like? What was the overall vibe? Excitement, nervousness, threatening? Give us the details.
During that single week, there is representation of probably the most powerful people in the world meeting in this single place. Not only politicians, but also representatives of business. So CEOs of large companies are there this single week. And for that reason, it's a great opportunity to meet all of them during these few days. We were hosting there a lunch where we invited our clients and partners. And overarching topic of that week was, first of all, sovereign infrastructure and AI. So when we were entering the week, there was this threat or instability related to what's going to happen with Greenland, which was later dissolved mid of the week. And another topic was security. So you can imagine in Europe, that's a big topic in context of the war in Ukraine. So that was something that dominated the discussion.
Was there a feeling of unity in Europe, or was the emotion one of positivity and direction, or was it more fear and looking around to see who's actually on our side?
I think it's mix of both. I think internally in Europe we are there is sense of unity, but there is also some division. We still operate as individual countries, and some approaches to the current matters are different, right? A few topics where I think we have a consensus, and those are topics related to strengthening our defense, increasing investment there, increasing reliance and resilience related to infrastructure and AI. So these are topics where I think we have a more consensus right now.
Was there any talk around what would be the right percentage of GDP to spend on defense, for example, or like Poland, for example, has been doing a pretty large military buildup. I believe they bought like Apache helicopters and Abrams tanks and lots of weapons from the United States recently as they seek to build up their forces. They obviously don't want Russia on their doorstep at all. And so like, was there any talk about that as a prototype or like, any specifics mentioned around what they would want to see?
I'm Polish, we are directly affected, but by what's happening there. Through proximity, it makes sense for us. But other places in Europe which are more remote, those topics are also more remote. Let's say the south of Europe, and the willingness to invest and spend is probably lower. So when I say there is division, is probably division on that topics. Where it comes to sovereign infrastructure, AI, there's overarching sense that we rely quite a lot on US-based technology today. We don't have that many European champions and alternatives. Leading models are produced very often either in United States or some of them also in China in open source space, for example. I think for Europe, the path towards increasing reliance is to start building on hybrid infrastructures. So a little bit hedging on the architecture choices, technology choices, using more open source, open standards. And of course, talent pipeline is also very important. So Unit 8 is quite fortunate. We are based in Switzerland. Switzerland is a magnet for talent. We have great universities here, EPFL, ETH. A lot of people want to move here. So we are quite in fortunate position to on that side of the problem.
France has seemed to be out in front on the AI side, in terms of AI researchers and labs. Are you doing any work with French companies? And at Davos, was there any focus on France as like maybe a prototype or something to look at in terms of getting AI innovation going?
Yeah, I think it's a great observation because actually probably France is an example of country who is historically and culturally invested a lot in technology, and they like to buy French solutions. As you have companies like Scaleway or Mistral, for example. Also in public sector and private sector, there is strong emphasis on the French technologies. So they are quite in unique position compared to the rest of the Europe.
So I can understand why politicians would speak about sovereign infrastructure and AI, the over-reliance on the US or China. But like, what are the countries actually doing about it? You had mentioned some technical choices, but that feels like a small step versus a large step many large steps that are likely necessary around actually investing in the sector, bringing down regulation to at least on par with the US, where while we have a patchwork of regulations across states, it's pretty much unconstrained innovation over here. So what is Europe doing on that front?
From our perspective, we see very well what enterprises are doing, right? So that's the perspective I could bring to the table. And there is big division because it largely depends on the appetite of the company to innovate and to differentiate. We see for the most mature and more advanced players are hedging the bets and investing in various solutions so that they could build internal skills to be able to, perhaps at some point switch from one technology to another. But you have to be also in the very luxurious position to do that. First of all, it costs more, right? You have to train probably several populations of engineers inside the company to handle those solutions. You have to also rely on the partners. So it doesn't come for free, yes? It's really intentional steps they're making.
That'll be difficult to keep up, right? So like if just the private markets, the actual enterprises themselves are the ones that have to drive that. You don't have the capital markets and the private capital to drive competitiveness in Europe, I don't really see the path there. And then if the public sector is not going to step in and support this, then it kind of just sounds like lip service then.
Well, I mean, there is a path. There is a path. I would say, like, you don't have to have the same level of capital investment that we have in the US. I think part of it is like, Michal had mentioned it earlier, these open weights models that you can use, right? And if you don't have to build a foundation model or a frontier model, your level of investment's already going to be a lot less, right? You don't have to do all that pre-training run. You don't have to build all those clusters and, make that massive investment. You can just take what's already been created and fine tune it to specific purposes. And we're actually finding that this push towards small language models using open weights models is actually yielding better results than the giant frontier models. Like Connor, in our own internal use cases, we're seeing that. NVIDIA wrote some papers about that recently. I'm interested to see how Europe, builds its strategy around these open weights models. Part of the challenge of that, though, is like, it's not really, it doesn't feel sovereign if you have to rely on technology built outside of Europe. So that's why I was kind of interested in the posturing around France, because Mixtral has its own open weights, I think, mixture of experts models that are out there. That could be maybe the starting point, right? Like, and what does sovereignty mean at that point? Is it the sovereignty for the EU, or is it by country? And like, but the infrastructure build out wouldn't have to be as capital intensive. And it could be that if Mixtral becomes like a focal point of like, okay, well, let's use models coming out of France, maybe could be a big boost for them. But Michal, like, what are your thoughts here on the open weights models, this push towards small language models? Does the tech stack just look fundamentally different in Europe around sovereign AI than it does here in the US, or what are your thoughts around that?
It's never like absolute decision, yes, like a black or white. I think we're gonna be operating in the in some level of this gray scale, yes, because you can also completely close yourselves to the state of the art, close models from OpenAI and Anthropic. I think the key answer from my perspective here is continue differentiation and allow yourself to use both, the best state-of-the-art models, but also use open source, tweak open source, retraining according to your needs. So I think the critical part is setting the right foundations in enterprise in order to be able to do that. Yes, so you can have a choice.
In addition to this talk at Davos about sovereign AI and what that might mean for Europe, was there any doom and gloom? Like in the US, we have like kind of the doomer camp, and then you have like the non-doomer camp is like it's the AGI camp. Was there that dynamic at Davos? Is there a doomer group, or we have AGI Today group, or like what was that like?
It's hard to say, but in our interactions with customers and stakeholders, we see both group represented. You see people who are absolutely positive about the changes, and they maybe overestimate the impact of AI in the future, and the ones that are completely against it, like why we use it, completely on the resistance side. Truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, like.
Well, let's look at what Jamie Dimon said on this front. I'm going to pull up a video that we can then respond to.
When you take the experience you've had at JP Morgan, what does it make you think about the impact across the economy? Are you in the camp that, say, someone like Dario Amodei is, half of all entry-level white-collar jobs will be gone in 1 to 5 years? Do you think it is going to be a kind of cataclysmic impact on the labor market?
Yeah, I don't know about that. So here, as a business person, my view is don't put your head in the sand. It is what it is. We're going to deploy it. Will it eliminate jobs? Yes. Will it change jobs? Yes. Will it add some jobs? Probably. It is what it is, and you can hope for the world you want, but you're going to get the world you got, and your competitors are going to use it. Countries are going to use it. However, I do think it may go too fast for society. And if it goes too fast for society, that's where government and business in a collaborative way to step in together and come up with a way to retrain and people or move it over time. So you go back, trade adjustment assistance was supposed to do that. If a town loses a factory and they lose jobs, you have income assistance, relocation, early retirement, retraining. We may have to do that, and I think we're doing that already ourselves.
That wasn't exactly a great success.
No,
In the US case, it was incredibly poorly
done. It did
done.
not work. We need to be prepared to have something that works this time.
It did not work. It did not work. This sounds a lot like the drive-through experience where like they deployed AI in the drive-throughs and like, you know, they were getting like bacon ice cream sandwiches, you know, like
Yeah.
it was like total disaster and they had to roll it back. Yeah.
Well, what's your perception on AI's impact on job loss and Jamie's comments there?
I think it's still too early to judge. To be honest, I expect there will be for sure some impact on the role composition, the way you hire in the future. You have to adjust to new realities. For example, even in our space, in technology space, you probably have to rethink how you hire fresh graduates and what skills you are assessing for, because our technology stack is shifting below our feet. I think there will be impact also on the ways of working in R&D space, in software engineering space. So I think it's coming. It's just not coming perhaps as quickly as everyone imagines. It's a process.
What about it was interesting. There's the particular American attitude of like, we're not holding back. We're going to implement this thing. Like you said that at the beginning of a statement, you know, like it's coming. We're not holding back. We're going to implement this. I think like in Europe, it's a little bit different, right? Like there's regulation around like what you could do here, right? You can't just go out and just eliminate jobs if you wanted to with AI. It seems like there are some protections depending on what country you're in and even being able to do that.
There are some regulations, and again, we don't have a uniform regulation across Europe, as it's really country by country, and some countries are more protective and have more stringent labor laws. France, Germany, for example. Switzerland is probably less a regulated market. So for a company like ours, we have to navigate those different regulations. We hiring today in 4 different countries in Europe. So you can imagine that's quite overheads related to way we contract, where we manage our headcount. How does it look like in United States? You also have a quite differentiated landscape between different states, right?
We do, yeah. I'd call it a patchwork of regulation. I actually have a chart on this where we do have some level of regulation kind of popping up in different places with what I can only assume is intended to try and regulate away some of this potential disruption. Let me show it really quick. So this is a few months old, but we have AI governance popping up in different places, much of which, if you read into some of this, we unpack this on a different episode, the regulation in Colorado, but it doesn't really feel like it's coming from a place of first principles around the technology. A lot of it, I think, is out of like trying to protect jobs. Ultimately, that really, like Dorian said, the American attitude, particularly in corporate America, is about just adopting the technology. There's really no stopping it. As far as protecting jobs or creating more social safety nets for people, I think that's a terrible policy. And then, like, essentially the end of that clip showed, it doesn't really work, and it's not something that really should be the path forward. Like, there should be instead capital flowing to help people understand this technology better, maybe back companies that are focused on intelligence augmentation, making the people that are doing professional work better, versus strictly focused on this AGI future and autonomy, and that everything is going to be fine when AI and robotics do every possible job that humans could possibly do. I think most of it's all, hype, number one, but it's ridiculous that Jamie Dimon would come on at Davos and say the solution here is more safety nets for the global population while they just run off and go automate away everyone's job.
This is an important point too, because I think it's leading to preemptive action. And I don't want to undersell how important it is what these states are doing, right? Like California had some legislation that didn't get passed, that had it passed, would have effectively made AI dead in California, at least for building, real AI systems. Like if maybe you could be building some very small models. They were trying to figure out where the cutoff would be, where this regulation would kick in too. And it was really true. They were trying to like focus it on larger companies without killing startups, but it wasn't working. And I think they were looking at number of flops as a way to like delineate between which models would be regulated, which one, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it's really important to understand that if California had passed that, it has nationwide impacts. It's not like California does something and then everywhere else is cool. We have interstate commerce here. All these states all work together. We often build to the lowest common denominator, right? So it's a bit like Europe that way, in the sense that when a tech company goes over to Europe, they have to build to the EU regulations, even if they're all in. Maybe Germany has more stringent regulations, and maybe they build to the lowest common denominator. That's Germany in that case, and it affects everyone. So what one state does has really big impacts. But people like Jamie Dimon, and I just want to go through some of Dario's like hottest takes, because they mentioned Dario at the beginning of that clip, and like 50% of white collar jobs are going to be displaced. Sorry, bro, we're not seeing that. And he's saying like within 1 to 5 years. Like there is no data to support that. The only data that's out there is showing that like skills gaps can be bridged in these white collar jobs. So like a person with less skill, this is the Stanford study. I don't know if you want to pull that up, Connor, but like the Stanford study that shows people with less skill can now compete with people with higher skills, that AI is helping bridge that gap, and it's leading to wage increases, right? So like there's this complete counter to this narrative out there that's actually based in reality. More and more research is coming out all the time. And then, David Sachs in the Trump administration has been very vocal about there is no data showing job loss with AI yet, right? And a lot of people are attributing rifts that are taking place to AI, when in reality they're not really due to AI. But like that's one of his hot takes. Human level AI in 2 years. I'm still waiting for human level AI. I don't know where that's at, but like that's not happening. A geopolitical arms race, like. Dario's had some of the hottest takes on this, and then you get Jamie Dimon, kind of a little bit more watered down vanilla flavor of that, but still pretty much hot takes. And what it does is it leads to preemptive action. So the states hear that, then the states grab those sound bites, and the state politicians start using that as a platform on which they build regulatory controls. And it's all a pseudo reality, right? Like none of this reality exists yet, like everyone's just sitting over here and look at this. If this happens, we're all screwed, but none of that's happened. That's like, we have to be very careful about what people are saying. And I think Sam Altman was guilty of this early on when he was testifying before Congress and really hyping the dangers of AI, and I think at the end of the day, they're all forecasting where we might be in 5 years, and what that's doing is giving a lot of ammunition to politicians who can then pass regulation or get support to pass regulation on the basis of that. And that doesn't help anyone,
Yeah.
especially a small lab,
Yes, I think the regulation is not bad per se, but this fragmentation that is happening either between the states or countries, it's really just adding to the drag, especially for smaller companies, right? And also regulating probably you noticed that, but regulating not the outcomes, but the tools, or like how things are done or built. I think it's also the bad approach. But coming back to Davos, there was one, I think, quite positive update coming from European Union. They building this form of legal entity called EU Inc. Basically, it's a form of legal entity that could operate across all countries in European unions, with the thinking in mind that those entities will be set across entire European Union, not within single countries, which should simplify operations of the businesses.
That's very cool. Wasn't that the intent of the EU in the first place?
I don't know.
You have a standard monetary policy, or what's supposed to be a standard monetary policy. You still had regulation where corporations essentially couldn't interoperate between countries. This is a new concept you're telling us of?
To some degree, yes, but in many instances, you were forced to set entities in every country you operate and hire people or having customers. Even in our case, we are established in Switzerland, but we're setting up entities in every country we operate. And that means different jurisdictions, different contracts, employment laws.
And that is going to come down with EU Inc. Or is that just an idea that was proposed at Davos, or is it?
That's just idea at the moment. It's supposed to come in place soon. I don't think there is still like legal framework explaining exactly like how it's supposed to work.
That's very cool. Would love to see that kind of innovation happening in Europe where they're making it easier to operate, especially, as they're pushing for sovereign AI, they're going to need a lot of deregulation to make that happen. To Connor's earlier point, there is going to need to be some capital investment. It's very difficult to marshal that kind of investment if you have this patchwork that's so hard to navigate that you can't operate effectively across boundaries. So hopefully it becomes something that Europe really takes seriously, and like creating environments like you have in Switzerland, or Switzerland seems to be a bit better in terms of regulation. It's quite a big tech hub. Maybe you talk a little bit about the scene there. I don't think a lot of people know that like Switzerland's this pretty big tech hub and has done a really good job of providing kind of the right environment for these companies to flourish. Maybe you talk a little about your local market.
Yeah, I mentioned that Switzerland is currently a magnet for talent. We have a pretty good, a very good education system, especially on university level, two major universities in Lausanne and Zurich, which are a place where many startups are built. And I have to say, tech scene is also quite dynamic at least on the European scale. Availability of capital is quite good. Nowhere to compare, of course, to US levels, but also a lot of M&A activity happening here. A lot of big tech companies have had European headquarters here in Switzerland. Google, Meta Labs, Apple has a presence here, usually through M&A acquisitions and availability of talent.
Yeah, 2026 is supposed to be the year of M&A, so it's quite a bit of activity and consolidation going on. I think what was interesting too about Switzerland is it is very friendly to startups. I think a friend of mine recently launched a startup in Europe, and I think there was like some incentives too in Switzerland where you could get government subsidies or some incentives to help if you create your company in Switzerland and run it there, headquarter it there. So that seems to be very helpful in getting that startup momentum going.
Well, you have our friends over at 10x too, and Antoine, who is also in the Palantir ecosystem. I believe they're out of Switzerland as well. So at least we have the Palantir ecosystem and the technology coming out of that, and the services companies covered in Switzerland.
Palantir has a large presence there too. Palantir's got a very large presence there. So it's a really neat area, man. And like the wages are really high. That's, I think, the only downside is like it's probably the most expensive market to hire talent, But other than that, it is probably the place you want to be in Europe if you're starting a tech company.
I want to shift back to something we were talking about a bit ago, which was around the regulation that likely needs to come down in Europe to either get to sovereign AI or to allow capital to flow more freely, or maybe even Europe or EU Inc., where you can essentially operate like US corporations do across the US, where we don't have to establish ourselves in every state. I'm going to play another video of Emmanuel Macron, who wore aviators on stage, which is freaking awesome. Let me play that clip really quick.
And the European strategy should be simplification. And when I speak about simplification, we started with the CSRD, CSDD, and we have to do much more on different sectors. And we did it during the past few weeks on automotive, and we have to do it on chemical, digital, AI, banking, and so on. And the core of this simplification is sometimes to get rid of some recent regulations when they desynchronize in a certain way the European Union in comparison with the rest of the world. But we have as well to accelerate the deepening of the single market. On all these sectors, The 450 million inhabitants and consumers market should be the domestic market of all the EU companies. It's not yet the case as long as you have complexities. In doing so, we must ensure respect, technological neutrality and non-discrimination within the European Union. This is another pillar, another point of simplification. Neutral approach in terms of technology and non-discrimination.
Again, getting back to deregulation, I guess we start with Michal, what is your perception? Like, how bad is the regulatory state and the burden that maybe you feel locally, or that Europe kind of feels on a more macro basis?
Couple areas that are going to be revised or need to be revised. Obviously, you probably heard about European AI Act regulating development of all type of AI products, including models, which actually is quite strict in terms of the rules they impose. I know that there is ongoing work related to revising this AI Act and making it less strict. We also have some overlap in terms of mandatory reporting, like for cybersecurity. New laws called DORA and NIS2, which oblige companies to report on certain dimensions. That's like dealing with several requirements of that sort is adding again to the drag and to burden, especially for smaller companies.
Yeah, that's the part that strikes me the most is like bigger companies, they have the legal teams and cash and ability to navigate this stuff and pay whatever fines are incurred. Startups do not. And so I think that really hurts, because in like what you want in a healthy economy where there are these kind of disruptive cycles where innovation is taking place is for incumbents to be able to be deplatformed and new incumbents to be created, right? Like that's a essential part of innovation cycles taking place. And if you don't have that ability, what the technology could be incredible, right? You could have the most disruptive technology in the world. It just won't have the same effect as if a new company formed with a new business model and maybe is highly disruptive on that business model can deplatform these incumbents. And that hurts. I think at the end of the day, that hurts everyone, because new business models that are highly disruptive often mean better, cheaper goods for consumers, And I think that, the stagnation has a real effect on a much more profound effect on people than all the regulation does. So like, I'll just give you an example. Let's just imagine tomorrow, all of the data privacy regulations were gone, right? And all of the, protections that are sitting there and all across all these countries are, now that could be bad for consumers, like in the sense that like, there's no legal framework. You still would be signing up for, websites and have control over your data from an autonomous perspective, your own autonomy. But the thing that would be really good for consumers in theory is this process of disruption and getting innovation happening and then getting cheaper, better goods delivered in the marketplace. I take that trade-off every day. Like I know the downside to data, deregulation and what could happen there in terms of privacy, but I would take the trade-off any day of the week, because I kind of like the fact that like here in the US, I can order cheap Chinese crap off Amazon and it can show up at my door in less than a day, like I get same day delivery. And I like the fact that prices on TVs and electronics have gone to the floor over the past 20 years. Like all these things are really good for people because it raises standard of living, like your quality of living. So on some level, like there needs to be a trade-off here. Like the countries need to recognize that for every regulation we create, this makes it harder for new companies to form and innovation to happen. And I think a lot of times what gets lost in the noise is this narrative around all the good we do for consumers by protecting them, right? We're wrapping them in this styrofoam so that they can't bump their head, they can't stub their toe. And isn't this awesome? It's like, no, it's not awesome. Number one, you can't move. And number two, it's like, I'm not getting this functional marketplace of goods and services to participate in,
Yeah, exactly. And I wish there is more focus going towards increasing competitiveness, innovation. We probably just need to change the proportions where we put attention.
What did Macron mean by non-discrimination. He was talking about technology. I got that, but he's focusing on this point of non-discrimination. I'm not sure what he meant by that. Is it like discrimination between European states, or like what is that?
He was talking about in the sense between Europe, the US, and Canada. Essentially, they're discriminating against internal European states by not supporting them or not actually what might be more regulation or some type of bounds around letting other countries kind of essentially outcompete the internal countries.
Was it in the context of them like kind of trying to pull away from North America?
I don't think it was just North America, but yeah, it was us and China.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
I just wonder, like, you know, Macron, this isn't the first time I've heard him talk about this stuff. He's obviously one of the key leaders in Europe. But like, does anything follow Davos? Because we kind of keep seeing Europe talk like this.
Well, we're not invading Greenland, so that's cool. I mean, that happened, right? So like, we could take that off the bingo card. I was stoked on that. And even though I think Trump called it Iceland several times while he was there. I didn't know Iceland was also on the menu, but yeah. I would love to hear your take on, like, so I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's based in Portugal, and I was like, hey man, what's the perception of what's going on right now with this Greenland thing and Trump and all this stuff? He's like, oh man, it's getting bad. You know, like people are really kind of getting upset. And there was talk of like, how can we put tariffs on the United States? And I was like, oh no. And like, well, he was telling me, you know, that way you operate? Because like everyone right now, when they have these companies in multiple countries, typically there's invoicing that's going on between, you know, company A and company B for services that are rendered, right? And right now those invoices are tax-free. But they were talking about like tariffing at 25%, right? So like every company now is going to have this 25% tariff levy on its labor. I was like, no, this can't happen. But like, what was your perception of the sort of general vibe around America right now, and like this retaliatory attitude too? Like, what can we do to screw the Americans?
The first day of the week in Davos was, I felt it was very tense. You know, it seemed like there might be actually military action happening in Greenland, and those emotions were slightly diffused on Wednesday after a president's speech, where he said there will be no military activity. Yeah, overall, in Europe, we feel that we have to rely on ourselves, that perhaps we can't rely on our historic allies as much as in the past, which is fair, but it also means that we need to, you know, increase the expenditures related to defense, differentiate our use of technology, invest more in sovereign solutions, open solutions. So yeah, I think these feelings are stronger and growing here in Europe.
Well, at least again, like Dorian said, Greenland and Iceland are off the table for now.
Yeah.
I want to keep talking about perception at Davos here. We know Palantir has a presence there. I think they have a whole building or whatever.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us the take on, you know, if you stop by, what it's like in their setup, but also the perception around Palantir at the event, and then the perception of Palantir in Europe, because we get a lot of signals that are mostly negative, but the question is what's real?
Yeah. So definitely, you know, mixed perception. First of all, it's not in average mindset. It's not completely clear what they are doing. Like, do they work with my data or not, right? Or what's the relationship related to 3 letters companies? Yeah, and what exactly is contribution of Palantir? And there is also a lot of misconceptions that I have to say historically perhaps they were not really addressed, you know, in the media, because Palantir never invested in much in public in fixing those public relations, at least in Europe, as speaking up publicly, giving interviews, at least here in Europe. I guess you probably heard those misconceptions also in the United States, that Palantir is analyzing my data.
Oh God, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I don't understand why it can't change that in Europe. Like who's the big purveyor of that, I guess, in Europe? Is it political parties? Is it news organizations? I don't know.
I guess it depends on the news outlet and which fraction they represent, right?
Same here.
Yes.
Similar kind of stuff. Yeah, exactly.
You'd think Palantir would just kind of, so like in the absence of a voice, that void is going to get filled by something. And generally it can be anything. Like they're stealing your data. They are core to the responsibility of killing people, citizens of certain countries that not on the battlefield. I mean, I think it would make more sense if Palantir actually just started to address these things publicly, which they started to do for a little bit there, by the way. Like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal put out an article. They actually responded to it. You'd think they'd do more of that versus just only leaning into the dominance aspect of their software, which also plays into the maybe the secrecy as well, or the negative aspects of the messaging.
Do you get a sense that they're heard there? Like, do you get a sense that Palantir has a voice in the European market to respond to that? They've been vocal in the US, but I don't know if people are watching that or not.
I think it would be very beneficial if there's more information, more effort related to managing those public relationships in Europe. Education, explaining what's actually, what is the software about, what do we do, what do we provide, impact use cases. I think it could only help and benefit Palantir.
I'm going to do a quick PSA for Palantir. So like, how many FISA warrants has Palantir received? I think it's 0, right? Why is it 0? Because Palantir doesn't collect and store any of your data. Palantir doesn't even have access to the environments in many cases where their platform runs, right? So like, I'm going to show you something. This, if you pull this out of your pocket, how many FISA warrants has this company received? I'm pretty sure it's in the thousands, because guess what they do? They collect all of your data, store all of your data. So if you want to see a spy company, just pull this out, right? And take a look at the manufacturer and also the software company, Google, Apple, whoever. That's a spy company. So, and I've never understood this, how people can walk around with a spy device in their pocket 24/7 and not accuse Apple or Google, but Palantir is the evil company here, is like tracking all of this crap, And I think at the end of the day, I think what it comes down to is their board and their founders. Like you've got Alex Karp, you've got Peter Thiel. I think those are, and Joe Lonsdale, and like those are big targets for one political ideology to kind of go after. And that's what they really don't like. They just don't like those people, at the end of the day. That's my theory as to like why they get so much flack. And I don't think it's a lack of knowledge at the end of the day. I think it's like, it's not that the people writing these articles don't know the difference between their cell phone provider and the people that make this and Palantir. It's that they just don't like the people at Palantir, so they're looking for any narrative that they can find and get traction in the market with, even if it's not true. That's my theory. That's a personal opinion. I'm not saying that's the case, but that's what I feel is actually going on.
Understanding of technology amongst some of the journalists is rather very very minimal, and they creating these opinion shaping articles without providing quality information to the readers. So you see a lot of that.
Michal, it hits home, and I'm just gonna bring up one more article that if you don't respond, you being Palantir, you get articles like this in Switzerland.
Yeah.
You get people writing a Palantir Trojan horse with
Oh my God, I didn't even get that at first. Like, what?
Trump writing. I think that's Trump.
What's the headline?
The headline is why Palantir is becoming a risky bet for Switzerland. It's like,
okay.
I just like, again, I don't subscribe to this belief, but like, how do we start responding to this? Or is it just up to the boutique services companies to take the slings and arrows?
Well, and their customers. It's not just the boutique service companies. There are big companies in Europe that use Palantir, including Swiss Re and Merck. And so they take those, slings and arrows too.
Imagine what type of courage you need to have as a CEO of those companies.
Exactly. Or even just the team that's responsible for maintaining Palantir within the company. It's like, I'm sure they get quite a lot of push back and just random comments that they probably don't want to have to hear. So yeah, that's got to be a rough position to be in.
I think it's also important to say that for those folks who work with the platform and Palantir, the experiences are largely positive and overwhelmingly positive in many of those organizations. They price the product that covers really wide space of use cases and functionalities. So if you judge it by merit, it's the feedback is overwhelmingly good from those who you really use it and interact with it.
Yeah, just to wrap up this topic, like, is there any perception to Palantir being expensive, and like and there's a lot of resistance to even taking the phone call because they're like, I'm not spending 10 million on this platform? Or
yes, there is that perception in the mentality. It's not entirely correct because situation perhaps change over the time, and I'm aware there are other forms of engagement that are more affordable to smaller buyers, smaller enterprises. But sometimes people don't even consider this as an option because they have in mind, okay, we not even consider that because it will be just too expensive. We can't afford it.
We've had to do a number of total cost of ownership analysis for multiple customers just to unpack what Palantir gives you versus like all the other things you'd have to procure and manage and switch together. But also that perception is very real over here. And it's something that, again, without more openness on even what it costs to buy Palantir, that void gets filled by just simple,
transparent pricing. If you're listening, Palantir, transparent pricing would be very helpful.
Wink, wink. Transparent pricing. Transparent pricing.
Stay with me.
Especially when you consider the cost of labor and headcount that you would otherwise need to have in the organization to build alternative. Yes.
That's a big part of our TCOs is we actually show team composition around the alternatives and how expensive that labor is, and how little you have of it too. I think a lot of the labor that goes into those other platforms is a precious resource. There's not much of it in the organization to begin with.
Let's shift gears here to the final topic that is near and dear to our hearts, which is around AI coding. Michal, I want to get your thoughts on just what's happening, the tooling that you guys are using, where you think we're at in the maturity curve here with the tools that are out there in the market. What's Unit 8 doing with all this at our fingertips?
Yeah, happy to share some thoughts on that. And we also hear recently a lot of requests coming from our customers related to not only use of those tools in the enterprise, but also rethinking entire software development life cycle. Like from the moment you have an idea to create moment when you create the business requirements, technical requirements, like those steps can be also assisted. And our approach at Unit 8, of course, we are partner of OpenAI, so we experimenting a lot with solutions like Codex. But we believe that as a solution provider, we should also know other tools out there. So we give our teams probably 4 different tools right now, so you can choose internally and test those solutions. It's also important for us to be able to advise our customers what's on the market, what works, what doesn't work that well, and pace of development and change is so rapid that from one week to another there's yet another leader. There's one more area I would like to perhaps deep dive, and these are all topics related to not code development, but to operations. And I think we see here quite a big promise. So platform operations, data management, FinOps, performance monitoring, fixing bugs in production, on cloud, on data platform. I think this is the space that we're going to be investing more in that area.
That seems to be Palantir's sweet spot, right? Like operational applications generally. So it makes sense, like they could be a leader in that area, right? So as you start to apply AI in the context of those roles, let's imagine you're an existing customer, right? And you've made the investments in a great enterprise ontology. You have lots of use cases you've been running in production. Putting AI in that last mile to help with triage or decisioning or action planning, that seems like a really big value that you could add, and you may not have to do a lot. You may have already built out a lot of the fundamental data foundations you need to provide context to the models, and your investment might largely be in which models you use. Do you do fine tuning? Do you just use commercially available models? Do you engage in a lot of some context engineering exercises in Foundry, whether that's a RAG system or some other knowledge retrieval engine plus something else? It seems like a heck of a jumping off point to me, though. I don't know if you're seeing that in these operational use cases with Foundry and AIP, though. As like, is it what I'm describing, or are companies looking at other platforms as alternatives to drive those operational use cases?
This is really individual choice of the company. We see both worlds. The folks who rely entirely on Foundry and AIP for everything in enterprise, but also others that are combining different platforms together, and where the landscape is more fragmented. We are there to support all of those modes and help them navigate this and combine this different platforms together. To the point I mentioned last time, like data upkeep and data quality was like the topic that was like totally neglected, and nobody wanted to do it. Nominating data stewards was super hard. And we see like with agentic workflows, some of this effort might be at least assisted. I'm not saying replaced, but to some degree assisted.
We always talk about how if you don't lay the right foundations, you don't invest in the right foundations, which is partially definitely your data, AI is just going to amplify your poor foundation there. And this is supported by the recent DORA report. Everything that we study and find is that it's just amplification. If you don't invest in your data foundations, it's garbage in, garbage out. If you don't invest in actually understanding what a AI human collaborative process looks like versus one that's just AI kind of like sending you some signals, you have a bad process foundation. If you don't set up your operating model correctly, such that technology is being led by the business and for business decisions, not just a technical toy, you're going to get bad outcomes. It's all just AI amplification. But you're right. People don't want to hear that, and they don't end up wanting to deploy the capital to fix their data.
To put more specifics around it, especially in the context of AI coding, like the DORA report was pointing to platforms to facilitate software engineering, which we've had for a long time, right? So like a good example of that might be consolidation of poly repos into a mono repo. So you don't have these context boundaries that you can't work across. And that's important for just software development, because code sharing is actually difficult when you have 50 repos and you want to actually bring in packages that are being maintained across those 50 repos and use them somewhere, right? And so like there were these natural boundaries that existed that like a good platform would solve in engineering. Or another good one is static code analysis, right? Like understanding, are the practices and patterns you want put into your code actually followed by the engineers, and like, are there any anti-patterns they're putting in the code, security vulnerabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So like a good platform will do static code analysis, and it will ensure that your patterns are maintained. Code generation utilities, we've had those for years, right? And that also makes up a good platform where you can get boilerplate generated that conforms to the standards and practices, and engineers don't have to write that all the time. All these things have been amplified by AI. So like if you work in poly repos now, well, guess what's hard to do? Have the AI reason across 50 repos. So that's actually challenging, And so what else is it hard to do? Get consistent results with these platforms. Well, what do code generators do? Well, they really help in generating consistency, especially if you inject LLMs in the generation process, So you can get more adaptable code generators, but it puts more guardrails around how code is written. So like these are just a couple examples of how AI amplifies the value of these things, but also if you don't have these things, you're going to get the inconsistent output result that happens a lot of these times over and over again. So I think like, thinking about it in the context of a specific implementation of like, say, an ideal AI coding platform, and Google's very opinionated about this, by the way. I think they have the largest monorepo in the world. Google's invested a lot in this, and the Dora Group's been a big part of how they measure the success of their engineering practices. But so they're highly opinionated, but I'd be interested to get your take on not just this premise of like you need a good platform in order to get really good output or good success stories from AI coding, but also does that also relate into what Connor was talking about, which is across other domains, right? So like whether it's data decision making at the executive level, if you don't have the right data foundations, you might amplify the fact that you have 10 different definitions of monthly active users and what revenue means and all these things. So AI will just amplify that. So maybe do you have thoughts on the value of the platform?
Thoughts, maybe not thoughts, but some observations. So we clearly see those organizations who did the homework and they really invested in the building data foundation way before LLMs were a thing, are in much better positions compared to others. On this other side of the spectrum, those folks who didn't do that and want to start building and jump on this AI hype train have really difficult time to produce outcomes, build applications, build solutions, because this gap is there, yes, and it's not that easy to bridge. We definitely see the difference between those two types of organizations in terms of like speed they can when they can churn the solutions today.
Connor and I have seen the same observations. I think what's interesting though is what the final platforms, not final, let's just say what do the platforms look like in a couple years as AI becomes an actor in them, and how do they change and evolve? One of the questions I have about the AI coding phenomenon, I think one, it's got a lot of momentum, and I think it's probably going to see a lot more investment because it does seem to be an area where revenues are, real revenues are being driven by this use case. So I could see more momentum being pushed into it, which means like more startups, more takes on how AI coding could be done better, maybe even like vibe coded too. You see OpenAI just released their new kind of wrapper for their CLI codex. That's like kind of like a vibe coding experience. It's a chat-based interface and it like integrates with the CLI tool behind the scenes and integrates in GitHub and does all this stuff. So I'm really curious to see how vibe coding evolves in this space, and maybe it's a combination of product owners and engineers that work together in these platforms in the future. What I am interested in though is how it may change the value of low-code application tooling. So like the traditional kind of premise on this is if you want to empower a non-technical person, you build them something like Workshop in Foundry, which is like a low-code application building tool. You can drag widgets around, wire it up to data, and off you go, right? And yes, Palantir is investing in AI FDE to help automate that process, right? What I'm curious about is, does the person who works off a purely vibe-coded platform that is code forward outperform the low-code version of that in the future? And that I don't have an answer to, but I was wondering if you've been thinking about this at all.
Can't comment really on that. I don't think I have a clear answer, like who will outperform whom. In BI space, I think we see quite a big promise. So imagine in the past you had these low-code solutions, not only on Foundry, but you had like dashboarding tools, BI tools like Power BI, Tableau. I start to think like those things will be needed in the future. Now you can create those dashboards with few line of code, modify them, and they work, and they add quality that is sufficient for dashboards that's gonna live for a couple months, maybe years. Yes, and it's not that perhaps that critical piece of the software. I think that's definitely place where we see a lot of potential, and changes are probably coming on the horizon.
Yeah, when we spoke to Snowflake recently, and they have Snowflake Intelligence. So when you can start to get validated, auditable queries that then support any type of BI that you want to see, particularly at the executive level, or you really have, or maybe even operations, wherever you need to see that signal rooted in some type of visualization to digest it faster, you really have killed BI in its form today, right? The people that have to build and sustain dashboards, particularly many institutions have hundreds of thousands of dashboards that people do not use or maintain. If you can just ask the question, get the answer, and you can ask for the form of it to be in the BI that allows you to ingest it as quickly as a maintained dashboard, that technology cohort is in real trouble.
It's almost like imagine you're starting with an analysis or a remediation plan in the morning rather than the dashboard. So like if I'm not going to the dashboard and I'm looking at the proposal from the model, the dashboard is the supporting evidence. It's not the entry point anymore. And that could really change the game in terms of like the value of Power BI or the value of some other, Looker or Grafana or whatever. Maybe those have to become integrated components of some other platform or something. I don't know. But I think everyone wants to get to this place with AI where it's like you start with the analysis and the action plan, and then you can work backwards to the supporting evidence. It seems to be where the push is going.
All right, well, thanks, guys. Today we covered Davos and the global sentiment around AI infrastructure and AI sovereignty, AI's impact on jobs, and Jamie Dimon's hot take, European regulation or potential deregulation, the perception of Palantir, and AI coding tools. Michal, so thank you so much for your time. Where can people find out more about you and Unit 8?
Thank you, Connor. Thank you, guys, for great discussion. Really enjoyed the conversation. And if you want to find more, you can visit our website at unit8.com or our LinkedIn page.
Well, thanks. Future episodes coming, more and more guests of partners, customers, content creators, tech companies, you name it. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.